2 weeks. Remember? That's all we need to get an upper hand on the coronavirus. Just 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Well, that's also how long it took for politics to get involved and for us to learn that experts aren't always right or trustworthy. 9 months. After COVID-19 came tearing into our lives like a freight train, making very clear it was going to disrupt everything for much longer than 2 weeks, I did some math. I figured that if all of our income dried up, our speaking engagements were going up in smoke, we could last about 9 months before we'd be forced into bankruptcy. One dream. Ever since Kim and I met as teenagers, one of our biggest dreams was to own a lake house. Early on in our marriage, I sketched a simple floor plan of our dream home. We wanted to be surrounded by tall pine trees and for the lake to be big enough that we could hear crashing waves. We hoped for lots of natural light, a place for campfires, a cozy library filled with books, and a big art studio where I'd create masterpieces. 20 years. After 2 decades of toil, the dream felt as out of reach as ever. I considered letting it go once and for all only a month before the pandemic hit, and when it did, I was too concerned with calculating doomsday scenarios to even consider I'd be sitting in my dream home on Lake Michigan less than 1 year later. But that's exactly what happened. This is the story of that improbable journey and how the Beatles song "Here Comes the Sun" turned out to be a fortuitous anthem for us and inspired the first series of paintings to come out of my studio. At the start of the pandemic, like most people, I was afraid. We didn't know much about the virus or how it would affect our hospitals, communities, or economy. Many people claim they're not creative. Well, we're all Picassos when it comes to imagining apocalyptic worst-case scenarios. The news was relentlessly terrifying as they seemed to report rising COVID deaths with glee. There was a lot of uncertainty, which breeds anxiety and fear. I felt like a fawn in the gaze of a predator, weak, helpless, and overmatched. The only thing that got me through the pandemic was my faith. Every morning, I parked myself in a chair in my office for an hour, lit a candle, opened my Bible, continuing a routine I had started about 7 months earlier. I fancy myself a professional reminderer. In order to be that, I need daily reminders from God. He assured me that even though I felt weak, He was bigger than me and He reminded me of the certainty of His promises. I have a practice I call reverse journaling. Every once in a while, I read through journals from years past and then write about observations I make or common threads I notice. I'll be honest, it's not pretty. I look back at old journals and it's embarrassing. I'm often ashamed about how easily I make molehills into mountains. How quickly I can go from courage to fear. How often I need rescuing. And yet, through it all, God remains constant. He never seems to lose His patience with me. Rereading these journals, it's a good reminder of all the times I've been taken care of, and that just because something seems like the end of the world doesn't in fact make it so. Seeing how often good things have come out of seemingly hopeless situations gives me confidence as I go forward. As the years go by, even though the progress seems painfully slow, I find myself a little less likely to freak out when things go sideways. Like during a pandemic. The practice of reverse journaling uncovered a gem I wrote on a retreat in November of 2019, a few months before said pandemic. I wrote, "I suspect the lake house is coming. We will know it when we see it, and when it's ready, it will come quickly." I also wrote, "One of God's favorite games is surprise." Obviously, that seemed like pure nonsense when everyone started stockpiling toilet paper. Fortunately, as we drove home from our last in-person gig before the lockdown, Kim and I determined that the business we were really in, the one we've always been in, is spreading hope and encouragement to others. We realized that giving live speeches was only one way of doing that, and our mission was about to become more important than ever. We turned on the video camera on St. Patrick's Day and did our first live episode of Coffee with Kim and Jason. Our goal was to let people know that they were stronger than they thought and that good would come from this terrible thing. Eventually, that led to our weekly show. I spent time in the studio, painting. The seed for this one had been planted in my sketchbook years earlier. The pandemic was time for it to blossom as the reminder that light can still be found during times of great darkness. The pandemic was unique in that we all were experiencing it at the same time. But we weren't experiencing it in the same way. Some suffered tremendous loss. Some were relatively unaffected, save for a lot more time on their hands. And some people thrived in unexpected ways, finding themselves in the right place at the right time. There were complicated feelings of guilt, jealousy, fear, anger, and grief. So in a real way, even though we were all in the middle of the same storm, we were experiencing it from different boats. That can be very lonely. In the 20 years of building our business, Kim and I often felt very lonely. As the years rolled on and discernible progress was hard to identify, we regularly went to bed wondering if we were fooling ourselves. It was terribly lonely seeing peers and family members building homes and starting families while we were still childless, sweating away in a small apartment and mounting debt. We didn't know many entrepreneurs, we didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't know if we were headed in the right direction. From day one, we've always felt called to this life. We were willing to work as a team and make sacrifices. We lived on rice and beans. In our case, it was Hamburger Helper. We did it without air conditioning, cable, and up until this year, 21 years into our marriage and with 3 kids, we only had 1 car. We got a lot of encouragement to keep going, but encouragement doesn't pay the bills. Our lack of financial success made us wonder if maybe we had misinterpreted the message. We grew slowly each year, but never made big enough strides to feel like our dreams were anywhere near coming true. It was easy to wonder if we'd set up camp on Idiot Island and everyone else was secretly rolling their eyes at our stubborn naivete. It was a very, very long winter and we spent a lot of time in the shadows. Those shadows represent the hard times in which we learn the lessons that take us from good to great. Those hard times are what gave us the grit to not just survive in the pandemic, but thrive. Our thriftiness, our teamwork, and our tenacity all proved to be essential tools for our greatest test. This painting prompts us to consider that the shadows prove the sunshine. They are a testament that light exists. The shadows remind us that they have much to teach us, and the light reminds us that even though we may feel lonely, we're never alone. I consider myself a naturally optimistic person. We were in a period of darkness, but I was confident that the sun would shine again. Clearly, I was naive, but I was convinced that the pandemic would be ancient history by the summer, maybe even Easter. Well, eventually, however, there came a point when the normal we longed to return to felt more like a mirage, a relic of some distant past. We bandied about the term new normal and wondered if that meant a complete reset of our economy, a permanent end to live events, or perhaps wearing masks forever. When I was in my teens and early 20s, I had big dreams and boundless optimism. I had a shiny new faith, ready to set the world on fire. Yet year by year, failures mounted. Initiatives often underperformed expectations, making me feel like a failure. Growth was happening, but it was painfully slow. That exuberant, childlike faith went dormant. I could feel myself growing more cynical. My old dreams were getting smaller and no new ones were allowed in. I was about to call a search party for that missing person, the optimistic dreamer I used to be. Maybe I was just naive back then, I considered. Maybe this is the new normal and I just need to get used to it. In early February of 2020, a little over a month before the lockdowns, I spent a lot of time journaling. I got as close as I ever had to giving up the dream once and for all. I considered it may have just been the silly fantasy of a naive dreamer. I wondered if it was actually preventing me from enjoying my life, maybe even distracting me from time spent with my kids. I thought of downsizing the dream, rationalizing I didn't really want it anymore after all. It seemed possible that my family would be better off if I just gave up this stupid dream. I was extremely close to putting a flag in the ground and declaring a new normal. Close, but I just couldn't do it. Even though I may have wished God would tell me I was on the wrong path, confirming I had missed the signs and needed to abandon this wild goose chase once and for all, He never did. Somehow I sensed and believed that the dream had been planted there by Him. From my journal, written on a balcony in Florida, quote, "As it stands now, affording the dream home with taxes seems impossible with our current business model. I can't say I've ever felt you telling me to abandon my dream of the lake home. Quite the opposite, in fact, as I've always gotten the sense that it'll come in due time. My dream, not to mention the oppressive slog of the pandemic and the civil unrest raging throughout the country, had grown heavy like a thick blanket of wet snow. But light has a way of illuminating the hidden beauty of something we'd otherwise overlook. That dense blanket of snow is made up of tiny crystals that shine like diamonds when light passes through. It often becomes a matter of where we choose to focus. Do we dwell on the burdensome darkness or search for the silver linings? As for me, I kept my daily appointments with God. I turned off the news. I stopped doom scrolling on social media. And on May 14th, 2020, when it was obvious that the pandemic was here for the long haul, I doubled down on optimism. I started an affirmation journal in which I wrote 15 times every day, I, Jason Kotecki, will own a dream home on a lake.
The smiles returning to the faces.
This painting was inspired by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who noted, "The earth laughs in flowers." The older I get, I never cease to be surprised by the power of small things, like flowers or a smile. That was one of the worst things COVID-19 stole from us. The ability to connect through a smile. Wearing masks may have helped limit the spread of the virus, but it also created an emotional and psychological distance between us. It took away a bit of our humanity and made it easier to treat each other accordingly. I remember visiting stores in which everyone wandered the aisle like zombies. Encounters with checkout personnel were cold and distant. One can debate the value of the trade-off, but it's hard to argue how glorious it felt when the masks finally started to come off. The moment I most treasure was standing shoulder to shoulder with 37,000 baseball fans at Wrigley Field, singing "Take Me Out to the Ballgame" during the 7th inning stretch of a Cubs game on Father's Day in 2021. It was glorious to see the smiles of the ballpark employees, excited to have people back in the stadium. The families catching a glimpse of themselves on the center field video board between innings. The fans grinning ear to ear with pride after catching a foul ball. The proud grandfather and grandson usher team we met. And the little boy 2 rows ahead of us playing peekaboo with Kim. It was pure joy to see smiles returning to people's faces. Oh, the power of small things. How many monumental moments in our lives hinge on small things, seemingly inconsequential decisions and actions. Even if we desire to move mountains, we often have little choice but to do so one boulder at a time. When the audience for a speech you've been preparing is much smaller than you expected, you focus on the ones who showed up and do your best. When someone needs help and you feel totally overmatched, you do the only thing you can and just listen. When you're at the end of your rope and feeling hopeless, you give it one more day. Even though it felt like 20 years had yielded very little progress, it became clear that the little things we'd been doing were adding up. Our efforts, tinkering with the live show, started bringing in real virtual gigs. The tribe we had spent 2 decades cultivating was stepping up to support us. We had a front row seat to witness the universal power of compound interest. Little things add up. It's a reminder for all of us. Persist. Keep showing up. Keep sowing kindness. Never again will I underestimate the power of a smile. One smile sparks two, which leads to three, and before you know it, you've started a tidal wave of laughter.
I feel that ice is slowly melting.
The first season of the hilarious and heartwarming series Ted Lasso premiered during the pandemic, becoming a word-of-mouth hit and serving as a much-needed balm. In the final episode, the optimistic nature of the title character played by Jason Kotecki comes to a head against the pessimistic, long-suffering fan base of the English football team he coaches. In an attempt to shield themselves from the pain that comes from raising expectations only to lose, they live by the motto, "It's the hope that kills you." But Coach Lasso offers the truth. It's the lack of hope that comes and gets you. We all love springtime, when hope springs eternal with daisies and rainbows. But what happens when you're in the middle of a bleak winter with no hope in sight? Look again. Melting ice is a sign of hope. It's a sign that you're one day closer to spring. The first 10 years of our business felt like one long, never-ending winter. I dreamed of making a living, of earning enough money to move out of our apartment, start a family, and live on a lake one day. But most days, the bank account, kitchen shelves, and credit card bills told a different story. On those days, I had to dig deep to find any semblance of hope. A $20 greeting card order, a promising lead from a retail store, or an encouraging email from a fan, they weren't breakthroughs that signal winter was over, but they were signs of hope that we were moving in the right direction and kept me going for one more day. The Venerable Bruno Lanteri said, "Discouragement is the main obstacle in our spiritual lives." In the dark days of winter, I might dream of a green 70-degree day in spring flooded with flowers, but for now, I'll take melting ice. As the dumpster fire that was 2020 moved into its second half, peculiar signs started showing themselves. Our business was on an upswing with a series of brand new revenue streams. A reconnection with a banker friend who offered his professional opinion that our dream home wasn't as far off as we may have believed, and inspired us to take a look at Lake Michigan. We stumbled upon Sheboygan, scheduled some visits, and even began looking at homes. There were never any big breakthroughs. We simply followed arrows that presented themselves. I'll never forget our second visit to Sheboygan. It was just me and Kim there to see a house for sale. We came upon the north side beach and sat together on a bench. Even though there were so many unknowns and roadblocks left to hurdle, as we sat together watching the Great Lakes waves roll in, I had an unmistakable sense of peace as I thought, this is our next home. There was no one clear reason I could point to that statement even being close to true. Heck, the house we just looked at was clearly not for us. But there were hundreds of small reasons. If you're in the middle of one of those long winters, cling to hope. Look for reasons to believe, even if it's just some slowly melting ice. Look for something, anything, that proves you're closer to spring than you were yesterday. Because the truth is, you are.
It seems like years since it's been clear.
We started our business during our first year of marriage. In the beginning, everything seemed so clear. I had started this comic strip called Kim and Jason that was obviously going to take the world by storm. It was just a matter of time before we hit the big time. There'd be best-selling books, licensing deals with Hallmark, and calls from Oprah. As you can imagine, based on all I've shared thus far, that clarity faded. The uncertainty of how we'd ever make any of our dreams happen enveloped everything like a ravenous fog. The dream house gradually felt unreachable, impossible. As humans, we can't help but try and figure everything out. Certainty gives us confidence. But when we lose clarity, we get flustered and we're tempted to abandon hope. Instead of jumping ship when the fog rolls in, stay in the boat and move toward the light. Have faith, which is simply the confidence of what you hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. Even as bright spots popped up during the pandemic, the way forward always felt murky at best. All we could do was rely on God to guide our path as we did our best to follow the arrows we felt He was providing. Even now, it's difficult to describe how it all happened, but after 20 years of haze, light burned through the fog and a path suddenly illuminated in front of us. A series of unlikely events conspired on our behalf, and we were led to establish new revenue streams, discover our dream home in a new city, sell our home, secure favorable financing, and move our home and business in a matter of months. I'm still awestruck and a bit dizzy from all that transpired, for it was a bumpy road. At first, we thought about buying land, but really good lakefront property is hard to find, and the skyrocketing construction prices put that option out of reach. We spent a lot of time scrolling Zillow looking for the right fit. Nothing stood out. Then, one day, I was on a walk and felt a whisper to look with new eyes at a house we disregarded several times. Upon further review, it occurred to me that all the things we hated about the house, the furniture, window treatments, some carpeting, were easily changeable. The foundation was actually pretty good once we pushed past the old lady interior decorating vibe. Our newfound hope died quickly, as we learned it had an accepted offer and would be taken off the market before we could even see it. More Zillow. A few weeks later, we uncovered some possibilities and scheduled 3 showings. At the last minute, our realtor told us the deal on the original house fell through, giving us a total of 4 to check out. That one turned out to be the last showing of the day, and it was the one we fell in love with. Even the kids were smitten. It was perfect. Kim and I told the realtor that we wanted to write an offer without even discussing it. We went to lunch to consider our price, and we overheard "Here Comes the Sun" by the Beatles. Choking back tears, it felt like a sure sign that the fog was finally lifting. Shortly after we submitted our offer, we learned that we were in a bidding war. The sellers came back and asked for our best offer with as few contingencies as possible. We upped the price as far as we could and took out the home inspection contingency because my dad, who had construction experience, agreed to drive up to give it a good look. Upon seeing the house himself, he noted that the backyard looked exactly like my Hope in the Darkness painting. You know, the one I'd created 6 months earlier before ever even seeing this place. As we finished the inspection, the sun broke through the cloudy sky, and I was sure that this was the one. We took my parents out to lunch afterward, and wouldn't you know it, Here Comes the Sun was playing again. Our hopes were sky high as we hurried to put in our second and best offer. The sellers came back asking us to take out the only contingency we had left, the one requiring the sale of our home. It was frustrating because we'd already given them our best offer just as they'd asked. And we were confident our home would sell quickly, but we'd also heard horror stories of people falling into financial ruin because they'd been forced to carry 2 mortgages. It was tempting, but I knew what I had to do. As the protector of my family, I just couldn't put them at risk like that. Mere inches from a 20-year dream, I had to make a hard decision. Sad, sick, and more than a little angry, I told the sellers we couldn't afford to budge. I knew it was a potential death knell. We heard back within a few hours that the sellers had accepted the other offer. You probably already know that the biggest tears come from a broken heart. I wrote this in my journal. It hurts so bad to be so close to a 20-year dream come true and miss out like this. It feels like we're farther than ever now, with winter coming and the ideal purchasing window closing so soon. I can't explain it. The stars seem to align so perfectly. This is why they call it faith, I suppose. I can't imagine any good or anything better coming from this, but that's irrelevant. Trusting God when all hope seems lost is true faith. I'm not writing the story. He is. And His ways and His thoughts are so much above my own. Thy will be done, Lord. To whom would I go? In November, with the election drama at a fever pitch, Kim started getting whispers of a Sheboygan surprise. With nothing to lose, we started praying for it as a family and kept taking the baby steps that presented themselves. My streak of writing in my affirmation journal remained unbroken. We signed on with a realtor to begin the process of selling our house, but there were no lake homes available in Sheboygan. A few weeks later, a promising one popped up and we went to take a look. It checked a lot of boxes, but it was way over our budget, even with the generous loan Kim's parents offered us. We attempted to bridge the gap by writing a heartfelt letter and offering them the first original painting that would come out of my studio. The next day, we went to a diner for breakfast, and again, Here Comes the Sun played. The sellers came back with a generous counteroffer, but it was still more than we can afford. We had to stick to our final offer, which led to a bad night of sleep that I likened to Christmas Eve, except you don't know if Santa will bring gifts or murder your family. We were convinced that them saying yes would definitely qualify as a Sheboygan surprise. They did not. I began to wonder if this damn Beatles song was cursed. It felt downright mean. Turns out, it was right all along. It was merely periodically popping up as a reminder. Suddenly, we got word that the deal was crumbling on the original house. The perfect one with the backyard that looked like one of my paintings, the one we'd already missed out on twice. We decided to put in a preemptive offer to put ourselves in a good position in case it came back on the market. On November 24th, almost a month after our soul-crushing loss, we got word that our offer was accepted. Apparently, the sellers were worn out from all the busted deals because it was for less than our original offer, and they kept in all of our contingencies. And it happened exactly 1 year to the day that I had written in my journal, I suspect the lake home is coming. We will know it when we see it, and when it's ready, it will come quickly. Dominoes fell quickly after that. Our house sold in 3 days for over asking price. Kim and I drove up to Sheboygan for the final walkthrough and the closing on a chilly gray January day. When we emerged from the title company after signing all of the paperwork and began walking to our car, we noticed clouds had dissipated to reveal a bright blue sky. Seemingly on cue, the seller's realtor opened the door and exclaimed, "Looks like the sun came out for you guys." Hopefully it's now clear why I wanted to create a series of paintings inspired by the famous Beatles song. Each one features a different view from our new backyard. One thing I learned from the pandemic of 2020 is that darkness shall not overcome the light.
Here comes the sun, I say it's alright.
And so here we are, hopefully nearing the end of a global pandemic. Vaccines are available to all who want them. The masks are coming off. The fear is subsiding, and we have an opportunity for not just a new normal, but a better one. But the darkness, it'll return. It'll look different than one we just experienced, but night always comes. At the edge of our property, perched at the top of a bluff and overlooking the vast grandeur of Lake Michigan, is a wooden swing. My son Ben helped me build it, and Kim and I spent a few hours together sealing it from the elements. I've taken up calling it the healing swing. We've had many guests park themselves there for a good spell, and it always delivers what's needed. A peaceful respite, a font of good ideas, a refreshing, soul-cleansing cry. Life is filled with mystery, much of it too big for us to understand. In our lifetimes, we suffer excruciating heartache and unspeakable tragedy. Just when I think I have things figured out, some new event reminds me of just how little I know. I live in a perpetual state of having more questions than answers. I've often thought of the tide as the heartbeat of the earth, and you always feel better when you slow yours down to match the rhythmic pulse of the waves. The swing is a great place to slow your heartbeat down to its natural state. I can go sit there when my world is in turmoil. The rhythmic beat of the waves and the cyclical nature of the sun remind me that there's an order to it all. I'm assured that there's meaning and a plan to all of it, even if it's too big for me to understand. That swing is like a front row seat to the mystery of creation and the secrets it contains. From that wooden perch, one can observe the ever-changing nature of the sky while maintaining a sense of certainty that the sun will emerge from the horizon at a specific time tomorrow morning. The majestic beauty resounds with the message of the Creator, who reminds us that the sun is coming and offers comfort in our present darkness by declaring, "And I say, it's all right."